Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 332 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. It seems that Monday of this past week has been dubbed Blue Monday. Not a day for swearing profusely, you understand, but rather an apparent nod to people feeling depressed after the Christmas and New Year of excess. Not so for us beekeepers, always optimistic. We look forward to the promise that spring is not far away, and with it, the start of another busy season of beekeeping. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. Before we get into today's beekeeping chat, a quick advert for all of those of you who haven't yet signed up to my Patreon page. I, together with Steph, have been creating beekeeping content for many years now, and if you're looking for somewhere straightforward, down to earth with tips and techniques, help and advice, then do take a look at my Patreon page. We have over 1,600 individual beekeeping posts, videos and podcasts filled with, hopefully, useful and timely help and advice. My approach is pragmatic and calm, I like to think, sometimes entertaining, but always with help and support for beekeepers at the heart of what I do. I keep my videos short and concise wherever possible, no waffle, no flannel, just honest beekeeping advice from years of keeping bees. Take a look and join me for the new 2025 beekeeping season. It'll cost you less than a jar of honey, and you never know, there may be something there that will help you improve your beekeeping. Hi everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. We're fast approaching the end of January, and it's been a slog, to be honest. On a personal note, the operation I had earlier in the month went as well as could have been expected, I think, and from what the medical team have said, they think it went according to plan. It's going to take a few months for everything to settle down, apparently, so whilst my heart tries to get its act together and steady things down, I'm looking out at a very changeable weather pattern and wondering how the bees have coped with it all. For our larger colonies, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. Wind and rain, sleet and snow, freezing overnight temperatures and frozen fishing lakes will do nothing to harm them, such is the ability of a large honeybee colony to regulate its core temperature and manage that microenvironment within the hive. With a plentiful supply of food stores, they'll simply hunker down, pop out on loo breaks and maybe, when it's a little warmer, grab some additional water supplies, but otherwise it really doesn't affect them terribly much. For our medium-sized colonies, the challenge can be a little more tricky, particularly at this time of the year. Colonies will be looking to develop additional brood, the process of replacing older bees, and the start of a growth phase in the colony that requires more brood to be managed and, inevitably, a larger area of brood that needs more bees working to stabilise and manage that core colony temperature. This has the potential to drain food stores more quickly around the brood nest area and have more workers on temperature control duties, acting as heater bees to keep the colony warm, and may see those bees dying more rapidly than otherwise they might. This could reduce the overall size of the colony to the point that the brood on the outer edge of the nest area may not be kept warm enough and subsequently die. One of the causes of something we call chilled brood. If the weather warms up a little, it could make the difference between these medium-sized colonies growing strongly in the spring or suffering a delay or setback in their development. It shouldn't, in most cases, cause a medium-sized colony to fail. It'll just be a setback, albeit a significant setback, if you happen to be wanting a fast start with a colony strong enough to go out onto something like oilseed rape. Where this time of the year really matters is with the smaller colonies. The ones that, going into winter, were not so strong. Maybe colonies that could or should have been united with other smaller colonies, or maybe even two, to give them a fighting chance of survival. Or maybe nukes that didn't grow really as fast as they should have in late autumn and now find themselves vulnerable to the cold of midwinter. It's not, however, a foregone conclusion that smaller colonies at this time of the year automatically fail. We've experienced seemingly miraculous colony survival for both nukes and hives, where a single half seam of bees has somehow survived the depths of winter and have gone on to grow into a strong honey production colony for the summer. So if you have a smaller colony, don't despair completely. However, smaller colonies do need closer management than the larger ones, and it's not just the cold that will see their demise, but also something we beekeepers call isolation starvation. Imagine, if you will, a smaller colony stuck between two frames. That's one seam of bees, an active queen, and a small area of brood that the workers are trying their hardest to take care of. I imagine they know they have to put the brood at the centre of all their hard work to survive, because without it, the colony is going to fail. The challenge for them comes when the weather is so cold they're forced to cluster over a period of time and are unable to move away from that small brood area to access food stores. Eventually, the dwindling number of adult bees run out of food around that brood area and die of starvation, even though just a frame or two away from them they may have plenty of honey stored from the autumn. Isolation, starvation. I mentioned closer management of these colonies could help, and I have no doubt that in the past, being attentive and understanding what's going on in the nuke or hive has allowed me to do enough to get the bees through to the warmer breaks in the weather and see them survive through to the new active season. There's not a great deal we as beekeepers can do, but a little help now might be all that's needed. Isolation starvation is pretty self-explanatory, really. As I've already described, bees get detached from their food stores and starve. So placing some food directly on top of a small cluster of bees can really help them. At this time of the year, fondant is the food of choice, and it needs to be directly on top of the bees when used as an emergency feed. There's no point adding a huge lump of fondant, let's say 5 kilos, wrapped in paper or cling wrap above the crown board or left in a feeder, when the bees are obviously not going to move around a hive or nuke box to get to the supplies they already have. This food needs to be touching the bees, literally. In a full-size hive, I would use an eek between the brood box and crown board or cover board. Make sure that the fondant has been warmed to room temperature so that it's soft and pliable, and wrap it in cling wrap. Once you've identified where the small cluster is, cut open the cling wrap, mirroring the area that the bees occupy, and place the fondant directly onto the top bars of that brood nest area. If the bees are a little lower than the top bars, push the softened fondant down between the frame top bars as far as you can to connect with the bees. Add bubble wrap or some other filler insulation to fill the remaining void in that eek so that the top of the hive is well insulated. Replace the crown board and roof. If you're using a wooden hive, it might be wise to add some insulation around the outside of the hive, and leaving the Varroa board in and blocking the Varroa screen may well prove advantageous in the bees' survival. I know there could be a moisture issue that develops with so much insulation, but we're talking here about helping a colony survive by whatever means we can. We can always remove mouldy frames of food stores in the spring when they're out of danger. For nucleus colonies in nuke boxes, it's exactly the same principle. Extra food added to the top bars, extra insulation for those that need it. With luck, this intervention is enough to help these smaller colonies get through to the warmer days of late winter and early spring. I believe this is where our polyhives and polynukes really come into their own. We see far more activity on cold days in our polyhives than we ever did in our wooden nationals and commercials. Where colonies in wooden hives are tightly clustered, those in polyhives are freely moving around and busy transporting food to the brood nest area and the surrounding cells. Our honeypore hives in particular have been very good at colony development in late winter, and we've seen these hives some 2 weeks or more ahead of their wooden counterparts. Now, I know it's not just about the hive material that impacts upon the survival and growth of colonies in January and February, but it does, in my mind, give them an advantage at this vital time of the year. Thinking specifically about my colonies right now, we have several that I'm concerned about. Mostly, these are colonies that return to us from the heather moors. This year, they seem to have suffered more than previously, and we have several that are quite small right now. I'll follow my own advice in the next few days, keeping a close eye on them. Weirdly, they seem to have gone from medium and strong colonies to pathetically weak colonies over the late December and early January period, and I'm wondering if I was too late with my oxalic acid treatments and Varroa have been the issue. Whilst it's costly to lose colonies, it's also interesting to see how different colonies act and react to the same challenges. Although we do have colonies at risk, we also have colonies that look like they need another brood box, such is the size and strength of them. I would add that these are in the minority of our colonies, just a handful out of 50 or so, but it's nevertheless interesting to see these super strong colonies in amongst the apiaries, and it's not just all in one apiary, which would make me think that it was an environmental issue more than anything else. In other news, I've been cleaning out the John Harding queen rearing nuke boxes in preparation for what I hope will be a varied and interesting new season. Regular Patreon subscribers will know of my various attempts to use this queen rearing method over the last couple of seasons, and if I'm totally honest, how I've failed miserably to make it work successfully for me. I can't not use this method because the equipment was bought for me as a 60th birthday present by my family, but thus far I've failed to get it to work at all for me. The biggest factor that I've been able to identify in this failed process is pretty simple, really. It's been a lack of attention on my part. Now, this may be a simple challenge to rectify. A closer look at my diary and better management of the process might be all that's needed to get this system to work. However, this might also be a failing of the system. For those of you who haven't seen the videos or listened to the podcast descriptions of my attempts, let me briefly describe the setup for you. I'll go into more detail once we get up and running in the season. Picture 3 nukes, if you will, side by side, joined together with a tube that runs from each outside nuke into the middle nuke. The outside nukes both contain a small queen-right colony. The middle nuke is queenless. The frames in the middle nuke are replenished regularly from both outside nukes with frames of mature larvae. These encourage nurse bees to move into the middle nuke to look after that larvae. The tubes have queen excluders in place, and that prevents either queen from the end nukes from wandering into the middle nuke and laying eggs there. Once we have this set up, I'm supposed to introduce queen cells into the middle nuke for the nurse bees to develop. However, we've never really managed to get beyond that initial setup stage, really. I've had several attempts, but either it hasn't quite worked out or the queen-right nukes have swarmed and made life difficult for me. I'm pretty certain it's my fault all the way through. So this year, it's going to be a major focus in the spring because I really want to see if I can make it work for us. I'll shoot a video explaining the entire setup once more in the next few weeks. It's easier to see what I mean rather than for me to try to describe it all here. I do hope to focus a little more on basic queen rearing this season. It's been a while since I did anything on the topic of queen rearing, having spent a small fortune on buying in queens. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but I know from the emails and messages I've received, a lot of you would like to see some more queen rearing techniques. Just thinking back about the various methods that I've used over the years, I think the most successful have always generally been the simplest. Isn't that always the case, though? What is it they say? Keep it simple, stupid. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out my website, www.norfolk-honey.co.uk, and for my latest videos and podcasts with more updates, tips and techniques, it's the same Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey. And remember, I'm Stewart Spinks, and that was Beekeeping Short and Sweet.